Um, the hard problem of consciousness, I feel very confident that I've solved it. And it's a combination of natural science and a combination of programming. I do a lot of that, AI programming, etc., but also a combination of quantum mechanics. And so, what you have is a lot of things that look conscious. You have a lot of things that look conscious. Let's take the smallest minute thing. Um, you have the water bear. And with the Tintigrade, you have pathfinding. Now somebody say, how do you know it's not moving around randomly? Well, you have pathfinding because when the Tintigrade is born inside the mother's body, or the skin of the mother's body, it has to go through a maze to get out of the mother's body, so it has at the very least pathfinding. So the smallest living organism in the world has pathfinding. Now an AI can do pathfinding. So you have a computerized version of pathfinding. Now does pathfinding get you to consciousness? Alone, it doesn't, actually. It doesn't seem to. Not saying it couldn't, but for the human brain type of consciousness, it doesn't. But you do have that type of pathfinding in the reptilian side of the brain. So you have all these functions going on, and they're just functions, immediate functions. They're not present, not pertinent to the future. And so what you're trying to do is trying to get to choice. Choice is a defined thing. And so a lot of people just dismiss choice, and this is why you can't find a hard problem of consciousness, because you immediately dismiss choice with an experiment, if you will. You find one experiment, you dismiss the whole concept, notion of choice. But if you try to define choice into a functional way, you actually answer the hard problem of consciousness. So, what is choice? And it goes into Penrose's hypothetical, the philosophy of Penrose's hypothetical, not necessarily the science of Penrose's hypothetical. Penrose's hypothetical goes on to the science of choice. In which case he says that the choice, the conclusion is that the choice is made in the future. The person, because obviously the actions are done before the choice, but in a quantum mechanical way, the conclusion is that the choice was already made in the future. It went back in time, so the person was able to shoot themselves and make that choice. Now, you might have a lot of fucking disputes, but you're not a physicist. And in fact, very few physicists challenge him on this because it's really hard to challenge. It's extraordinarily hard to challenge because the person did make the choice, but they're dead in the future, of course. So they would have had to make the choice in a quantum mechanical way. And so what you have is pathfinding in the brain. Pathfinding helps, and then you have the spectacle of quantum mechanics, where electricity, the electron follows you can do this with biological quantum mechanics and with plants. So what happens is the photon goes into the leaf, and in a quantum mechanical way, it chooses every single path. And what resolves in reality is it finds the least pathway to resistance, and that's how the plant actually is fed through the photon. The same would be true of the electron. The electron also travels at the speed of light, etc., blah, blah, blah. And the same actually is functionally true for a lot of electric things, including computers. So the electron finds the least pathway of resistance, always. And why it does that is because of quantum mechanics. It chooses all the paths, it pathfinds all the paths at the same time. So pathfinding is involved. But it does this in future strings. So this actually works well with neurons, because neurons have many pathways and many strings and many firings, not just chemicals. And so within all that, the electron is finding the least path of resistance. And this can explain a lot of things, a lot of functionality in the brain. One being the one very major theory of the brain is our belief systems in general. So when something contradicts our belief system, we want to fight against it if we're not open-minded. If we don't actively try to choose to be open-minded, actively choose to the resistance, and to which the resistance becomes the least resistant thing, then we just dismiss things offhandedly. And this occurs with everyone, skeptics alike, everyone. Their belief system becomes attached to this type of view. And so, what a choice is many strings in the future. The problem is you have to make the future objective. In order for this to work, the future is objective. It's not subjective, it's objective. There's all those pathways exist simultaneously in an objective way. And when this is the separation between quantum reality and classical reality. So when all those pathways collapses, it is the future, all the possibilities collapsing to a present reality, which is in fact, as a whole, a choice. It's not just pathfinding where you just go back and forth like an AI does. It does that simultaneously. And so, the effect you get from that is you have many uncaused causes until you get the more likely, not all the time, but the most probable cause to collapse into reality. That is the distinction of a choice. And this is where things get even more complex. Because the conclusion is a choice is then a function of reality. Reality is then malleable, and the functions in reality into the future are malleable. You don't necessitate many worlds, but you necessitate a tangible future that becomes a present. And that tangible future, in order to collapse, was objective at some point. And so you have a future pulling the present. The issue, it would be to the detriment then of determinism. It would be, in fact, the nature of reality, honestly, like if you're still a determinist, I mean, I would offer to be at least a somewhat indeterminist, or a mixture of indeterminism and determinism. Because the consequences at the bottom of reality, you have chance as a force. I mean, you have the quantum field, which is for all incidental purposes infinite in infinite possibilities, to arise a possibility that could exist in the classical reality. And all those possibilities collapse. This is how the universe began. And so it wouldn't make sense if that process just completely stopped. In fact, the manifestation of all things existing, it wouldn't make sense if that process stopped at life. It wouldn't make sense to special complete consciousness out of the existence of a very real thing that happens. So what you have is, with pathfinding, but on a quantum scale, choice. And if you have pathfinding with on a quantum scale choice, that is the definition of consciousness. That is the hard problem of consciousness solved. on the most basic level, because then all of consciousness can be a collection of choices and a collection of infinite pathfindings, where the most realist, closest collapse would give you reality. And that is also indeterministic. It is indeterministic. The fact that something from the future pulls something that's causeless, the causal beginning, has no place in it other than the start of the function. The algorithmic function, which might not be algorithmic actually, is more of an exceeding randomness towards the future until the future collapses into the present. That function, I can't say it's an algorithm, just say it's a function for the purposes of an argument, is the collection where you get collective consciousness. And so you can actually start to divide life. You can actually start to separate forms of life. Sorry, car was passing by. And the forms of life can be separated into a computational life, like a tentigrade, where the only appearance of consciousness it has is one aspect of consciousness, which is the pathfinding. But the pathfinding must be done at a quantum level in order for you to exhibit choice. And so you can separate a lot of life into not that it's less valuable, but into what is more conscious, what is conscious. There's a definitive answer actually at this point. What is consciousness and what is just pathfinding? And you can have all basic life almost as pathfinding, and then that solves the problems for mazes, etc., blah blah blah. And then you can have more complex life that, if it exhibits quantum qualities, to be conscious. The lowest level of consciousness, if you will, to the highest level of consciousness, which can get even more complex. Something, let's say, that's non-living could be conscious under complex standards, very complex standards, more complex than us. But that's the conclusion. You have infinite functions at the bottom, which is the quantum field, to raise less complex functions, but within those more complex functions. And then you have life, which is an amalgamation of all kinds of patterns, and that amount to pathfinding. And then after that, because that's all life is doing. If you observe life, I mean, at the fundamental level, what life is doing, including the reproductive system, is pathfinding. At the fundamental level, it is basic determinism on the majority of life. It's just pathfinding. Cause, effect, reboot. Cause, effect, reboot. Cause, effect, reboot. Cause, effect, reboot. Fail. Success. The majority are failures. And then like 94% of life goes extinct. And so the rest of the life that does live would be defined as successful. It would be like the ones that reproduce to live until today. Would be the evolutionary process. And the significance of that is because pathfinding doesn't predict because pathfinding doesn't predict the possible futures. The necessity for consciousness could be able to evolve, because you have some life forms that don't necessarily die, but they came close to death. Near-death experiences. Lots of life forms had near-death experiences. And those that survived had genes that triggered a reasonable response to have some form, a basic form of consciousness, and then you have the apes who find tool making useful, a creative form. And then, and of course, you had other animals, including birds, that find tool making useful. And there's also quantum mechanical things that work in birds. One of those birds, in fact, uses quantum mechanics in the eyeball in order to navigate the world, because the magnet is a quantum magnet in the eyeball. That was discovered. That was the solution for the bird in order to navigate the world. But for the animals, I'm just going to ask, do you understand quantum mechanics? Because because they're going to want to dismiss the arguments on the basis of misunderstanding quantum mechanics. And the fact of the matter is, you don't have to understand quantum mechanics to understand the conclusions of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics has conclusions. It's a successful theory. It is misunderstood, but it has conclusions, and those conclusions can be very well understood without understanding the whole paradigm. That's like saying, do you understand a computer? You don't have to understand a transistor to understand how the program works, the end result of the computer. That'd be like saying you can't work an app because somebody else programmed it, because you don't understand how to program language. Sorry, there's many rebuttals to that, and that's very easy. It's not a quantum woo argument. I'm not putting magic out of a fucking hat. I'm telling you what really fucking happens, which is multiple future strings that are taken that collapse into reality. That is the nature of quantum mechanics. That is the conclusion of quantum mechanics. And there's no more theory out there at the moment that is more successful than it. And a more successful theory would actually do the same thing, but even more complex. So, and of course, there's the evolutionary reason for why involve quantum mechanics in a biological life form, and that's what I was getting at. Was when you create tools, and eventually you get to the choice to walk versus to sit in trees all day, and then you get to the meat as an option, and then you get to meat being cooked as an option, which reduces calories by magnitudes, which can support even more brain matter, more complex networks of brain matter, and that leads to more complex quantum mechanical patterns in the brain. And so what is the consciousness? It is all the pathfinding done in the brain at the same time. It is all the pathfinding of all the electrons, up not just firing, but the potential firing and the solutions, the collapse. So why is consciousness seem greater than the sum of the brain as an emergent property? I mean, a program can fit neatly and nicely in a computer, but why does consciousness fit overwhelming, like it could fit into 10 brains or 20 brains or 100 brains that it would take to produce the type of consciousness we see that people do? I mean, why does it take magnitudes on classical computers, which are still operating on quantum mechanics in the just the smallest scale, but not the predictable scale, not the calculation or algorithmic scale? So basically what the computer is doing is not on the quantum mechanical scale, but there's quantum mechanics involved on the lowest scales. If you have a computer that is on the highest scale, then you can get this material equal to the brain. You can get that equal of the brain only with all the fundamental forces of nature, which is what it takes to make the human brain. All the fundamental forces of nature. If you think about it, the most complex thing in the universe is, at the moment, unless there's other it's complex, intelligent, conscious life. And then the most complex thing on Earth would be the most complex thing we can observe. We can at least say it's the human being. It has all the complex information that necessitates all the laws of physics before it. And so all the information of the universe can fit inside one human being. That the end result, anyways, the end result of all the information of the universe can fit inside the human being. And everything greater than it would be just an extension of it. All the information of all the human beings, let's say, could fit inside an alien. Um, it gets the sums get more complex and more complex, but using the basis nature of the universe, you have infinite pathfinding. And with infinite pathfinding, you have the denigration, destruction of determinism. And the problem is, it's not necessarily indeterminism either. In this expression of choice, where many futures are laid out, and it collapses to the present, you have the appearance of what would be libertarian free will. Not just free will, libertarian free will. And then if you were to take certain timestamps of one human being, and all they're doing all day is just imagining what they're going to do tomorrow. The whole fucking, like all their potential pathways, and they let's say that it's inaccurate based on all the knowledge they have, but let's say they had a lot of knowledge of what's going to happen tomorrow. Extremely a lot of knowledge based on, general patterns that human beings do. They can take that and get like a really good accuracy of what's going to happen based on just playing it over in their head. There's always going to be this one thing, this one person who throws a wrench into the problem. But why is that? Why would that be? It's because of the unpredictability, the indeterminism of human beings, and the capacity that I just showed you what actually is a choice, the functions of a choice, that allow that person who is the wrench to also have free will, because it would clash, which is not out of the paradigm. So it's not that complexity equals free will. I didn't hand wave that either. I said for these specific reasons, the ability to navigate the future is free will, which is the capacity that human beings have in operating in the future, which is what the quantum biological solution entails. If the hard problem of consciousness is because of quantum phenomenon, then the hard problem of consciousness is solved with quantum philosophy. The acceptance of quantum mechanics as a fundamental part of nature, and the incorporation of quantum mechanics in the human brain, and the solution to consciousness being all the pathways that seemingly collapse. And so what you have is not determinism, and you don't necessarily have indeterminism. What you have is plausibilism. And with this type of plausibilism, where any one future could be collapsing into the present, you have the appearance of choice. You have the function that, for all intents and purposes, would be the best definition of what choice is. And then with that, you have free will. You don't have all these underlying back causal things causing the choice. You have the denigration, the appearance, the want, the desire of the future emitting backwards to the present, collapsing into reality being the choice. And then we have this problem of identity. And I'm going to get to the problem of identity right now, actually. This should be a separate video, so I'm going to make it short as fuck. But when you see people who say I, often even determinists, you see people who say I, and what they do is they exclude parts of the body. So they start to exclude, like, let's say, the fingernail. That's not me, that's just my fingernail. And then they exclude the hand. That's not me, that's my hand. They exclude the the chest, the entire bodily functions, all the way up to the brain. They exclude parts of the brain. They exclude fundamental elements of personhood while still saying I. And they exclude the functions of the brain that allow them to be who they are. Into which they believe that they are this abstract eyeball looking at the brain, looking at what's inside the brain. And that's not what the I is. No, the I is the whole, and it is partially the environment too. Lots of people who would argue what the self is would be inclusive to the environment. A lot of the self is made with the environment. A lot of molding of the self is because of the environment. So you can't exclude the I from the environment, and then you can't exclude the I from the bodily functions, because you wouldn't be who you are without the bodily functions, and then you can't exclude the I from the brain functions. In fact, it could all be the I. And so when you get to that point where it's all the I, then the capacity for identity is the encompassing self. It is the experience and the thought all at the same time, and the functions of that. You could get to a point where you don't exclude, and this is interesting, this is also a separate topic, but if you were to include the causal relationship of your parents, and to include the causal relationships of their genetic parents, and this gets into a complex fabric that goes back into back to the first cell at some point, the first couple of cells. There was actually many first cells, but whatever. It goes back to the first cell, and then you get to the birthing nature of the earth before life, like the capacity for the earth to actually even produce life. And you get into a bunch of random elements. Like if you were to start that system now, like if you had a different planet, same parameters as the earth did 4 billion years ago, to make the assumption that you would have human life 4 billion years later would be a bad assumption. Like all you know is the parameters of the planet. You have the exact same quantum functions, quantum states of the planet at the time. And to let it go, to assume that you would end up with human beings, would be a vastly incorrect assumption. And then to end up with people like you, if you did end up with human beings, would be a vastly incorrect assumption. And so, but you could take I and make it the causality of all that's happened before you, because everything that's happened before you necessitates the you. And then you could take that to necessitate the planet, and then you could take that to necessitate the entire universe before you, until which you get to a point where you're the quantum state. And this is why the distinction for the I is important. But if you philosophically did that, going back to that root, you are the universe, being the consequence of the universe. Now somebody would say, well, that's confusing the steel with the door with the car. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. In fact, the car couldn't exist without the idea of the car. Somebody would say, well, the car could randomly assemble itself to be a car. No, it doesn't, because of the word purpose. Because the word purpose exists, it's not a car, because it doesn't exist. And so nobody would know that they could drive the material thing. They wouldn't know. And they wouldn't, and if they didn't test it, they wouldn't know to call it a car. And so the car is also a function of the word purpose. The fact that human beings created it. And this distincts things from being determined or indeterminate, a consequence of the universe, or something that's created. There's a big distinction here. When you talk about the word purpose, somebody would say purpose is subjective, but you wouldn't have objective things that have a purpose. Um, Desire, want, and will to create something gives something a purpose. Objectively, it has a purpose. You just need the person who's sitting there who I've given it to give it a purpose. You give a piece of wood a purpose and you end up with a chair. It's not a chair if you don't sit on it. If it's never thought to be utilized as a tool to sit on. It's just a artistically shaped piece of wood. And so, the separation between designed things and undesigned things is easily done with the word purpose. For some people, the universe is designed in their mental image, in their head. And so, everything is designed. But for those who don't think that the universe was designed, you do have that clear distinction with purpose alone. Purpose alone can make that distinction. Where some skeptics would say, well, there's no distinction. Yes, there's a distinction. There is a complete distinction. So I'm going to end it here because I feel like this is a good place to end it.